Ben Johnson. This was like big news, man. And for Lions fans, dude, your worst day, right? Now you've had a lot of bad days, but the other day was bad, right? It's almost worse to lose in the conference championship the way you guys did, give up a 17-point lead, the fourth down decisions, the timeout, like the drops, the lack of execution. And that's something that, listen, I didn't get into this on our show, but the more time that has passed, the less I blame Dan for the fourth down decisions. I blame Dan for taking the timeout late in the game. And I blame Ben for that too, right? You got to have a second play. In that situation, you're leaving the fate of your season in the hands of an onside kick the minute you take that timeout. And to me, I thought that was the cardinal sin. The more I looked at the fourth down, calls, and I talked about this on Monday. Okay, it's what you do, right? Like that's who you are. If the analytics support it, there's an analytics crowd out there that I know that, like get painted in a bad light sometimes and by meatheads like me and that sort of thing. I think analytics are an incredible tool, but you have to, ultimately it is about the guy who's holding the tool, right? It's a tool. How the guy holding the tool, the head coach or the play caller, how the guy holding that tool uses the tool is ultimately what makes analytics powerful or irresponsible. And I'm not here to make a determination on what Dan knew or didn't know, but I know one thing he did know, factoring that into the analytics and weighing kicking field goals against going for it on 4th and 3 or 4th and short later in the quarter. Badgley, their kicker, when I looked at his numbers, I completely understand the decision, especially when you consider the fact that Reynolds has the ball in his hands. Okay, you're up 14. You have an opportunity to go up 17. I know what Dan's thinking. He's like, let's go up 21. Remember that stat about Kyle Shanahan and being down in the fourth quarter and that sort of thing? They just got done scoring quick, right? And before you knew it, after that situation, they'd scored again twice more in a flash. I think one of their later touchdown drives was 7 minutes, but they were putting points up and chunking them with ease in the second half. And so, like from a standpoint of outscoring the team, I understand it, but more than anything, I understand it from a perspective of the kicker was literally on a practice squad very recently. Was not your starting kicker to start the season. I think his last outdoor kick was in January of 2023, and it went wide. And when you looked at him outside between 40 and 47, I think he's 66% on his career, and at 47 or higher, I think his field goal percentage dips down below 60. And so when you look at lining a guy up who hasn't had to make a kick of this magnitude outdoors in the better part of a calendar year, I understand it. I understand not putting the fate of your team in the kicker's hands. I do get that, so it's not lost on me. But long story short, terrible day for Detroit fans, even with everywhere you've been. But how about this consolation prize? Really, I mean, this is a big deal because I was at Inside the NFL today, and there were guys that were like, we were talking about, can Dan Campbell get back there after making a mistake like this? First off, I think you can, and I think the evidence is right over there on the other sideline in that game Sunday. Okay, I've played in a game where Kyle Shanahan, you can put it on Dan Quinn, Kyle Shanahan's the offensive coordinator. They're up 8 at the 25-yard line, basically, with a chance to win a Super Bowl under 4 minutes. Okay, their win probability was right up there with Detroit's win probability, up 17. However you want to slice it, they had a 90+% chance of winning that game when they were up 8 down there. And they took a sack to Trey Flowers. They incurred a holding penalty. They're out of field goal range because they didn't run the ball. And if you're going to tell me that Dan Campbell is disqualified from ever getting back on this stage, I would tell you to look no further than the guy who's playing in the biggest game of the season this year. Because there was a time where I could point to Kyle Shanahan and say he's the reason that team didn't win a Super Bowl. He's the reason I have a ring. He's the reason I have 2 rings. Because if it's not for Kyle Shanahan throwing the ball, I don't have 1 ring, and I might retire, and I might not end up in Philly. So I look at the Dan Campbell situation and I say, there's nothing telling me they can't get back where they were Sunday. And if Ben Johnson's back, there's absolutely nothing telling me they can't get back where they were. There were guys on the set today that were talking about this very issue, and they said that if Ben Johnson leaves, Dan Campbell will get fired, in the next year. I don't know if that's true or not, because I don't know who he'd hire at coordinator or how good it would be or if he'd be able to replace Ben Johnson. But the bottom line is he's not leaving. And I don't know what he's being paid right now. I know what he was asking for. Supposedly some people were a little bit spooked by the numbers he was talking about. I can't get into, did they give him a handshake deal that they were going to pay him more money down the line or something? Did Sheila Ford Hamp and him have a handshake deal? Are they going to restructure the contract in good faith here coming up soon? Maybe Carolina just blew up his value to where other teams were like, yeah, we can't pay you what David Tepper offered you. If that's what you think you're going to get here, you're not going to get it. There's so much that I don't know. But what I do know is that the Commanders and the Seahawks were not better opportunities than staying put for him. And I think not enough coaches think this way, right? I think not enough coaches play the long game. And it's easy for me to say because, as I'm about to discuss with Hannah, every situation is different. And it is like the stock market. Your name could be hot one year and it could cool off inexplicably in the next year or two. And a lot of it can be because of the team you're on. Like for Dave Canales, maybe Dave Canales was like, I got to jump right now. Like, am I going to get 2 years out of Baker Mayfield like that? I think it's a vote of confidence for Ben Johnson to stay when it comes to Dan Campbell. It's a vote of confidence for Ben Johnson to stay when it comes to Jared Goff. I think it's a vote of confidence for the culture in Detroit. I mean, if you're really thinking about this, and you're a Detroit Lions fan, just consider this for a second. There was a time where you couldn't get a free agent to sign in Detroit. Like, I don't need to look it up, but that wasn't on the list for a lot of guys, right? Like, that's not an attractive destination. Nothing against the city of Detroit, but like guys are looking at Miami, LA, New York, like big markets, warm weather, off the field opportunities. In today's NFL, free agency, that stuff matters. And if you're not winning and you're not in a city like that, it's going to be hard to bring free agents in. And that Detroit dark cloud has followed that franchise for decades, right? Through different iterations of ownership and the whole thing. You are not the same Detroit Lions. Look no further than this situation. This is rare that a guy with a name this hot decides to stay with the team he's coaching. He has opportunities to go a whole host of places, and he decides that he wants to stay in Detroit with Dan Campbell, the guy who said he was going to bite people's kneecaps, and Jared Goff, a guy that Sean McVay, one of the brightest offensive minds in football, decided to discard. Okay? You guys have something different going on now. And since 2020, when Sheila Ford Hamp took over, all she's done has hit buckets. All she's done has been to make the right moves. Whether it was the easy moves like firing Matt Patricia and the GM, or the tough moves like hiring Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes and bringing on Spielman to be her kind of executive assistant who helped her find Dan Campbell and has weighed in on an unknown amount of big decisions that she's had to make. But I just wanted to say this. Ownership is the one area in the NFL that there can be a giant variability in the skill level and outcomes as it pertains to making decisions and hiring coaches and doing what's right for the franchise. There are only so many quarterbacks in the league. The delta between the best one and the worst one, I bet the delta between the best owner and the worst owner is bigger. And I think Sheila has done a tremendous job, not only being a woman in the NFL, but also just being no bullshit, seeming to be deferential to people around her when it comes to tough decisions, seeming to surround herself with the right football minds and seeming to be a good teammate. And I don't think it's insignificant that this gal was a Yale tennis star. Like I didn't know that. She's a collegiate athlete. How many of these owners have athletic backgrounds, you know? One of the only gals running an NFL team happens to be one of the biggest jocks, right? And I think also that that mindset can permeate into the culture of an organization, whether you know it or not. I think she's done a tremendous job. And I think because of Sheila and because of the hires that she's made, you are not the old Detroit Lions. You are the new Detroit Lions. So I know that on Monday when you wake up, the sky is falling and you know you're going to revert back to the old Lions. Like you just know, hey, that was fun. It's fucking over. That's not who we are. Who we are is what we're going to return to being. And it's going to be that way for an unknown amount of time. And when Dan Campbell says, I can't guarantee you're going to get back here. You know, when Dan Campbell tells the players that, which is a very real thing, that's what any coach is telling their players, right? Unless you've got Patrick Mahomes or somebody like that. Like, you never know. The window is not guaranteed. Sometimes you don't know it's closed at all. Sometimes you don't know it's going to close in the next year. You don't know how big that window is, but I do know that you are doing things organizationally the right way. And this today is evidence of that and the fact that you are not the same old Lions. Because how many teams are retaining hotshot coordinators just on the strength of the culture of your team and the head coach and the outlook? Because this guy knows if I stay and things don't go well, I could become one of these coaches who disappear off the face of the earth and we don't hear about them in the next hiring cycle. He's deciding to take that risk, and I think it's telling. And I think you should bet the over win total on the Detroit Lions next year because Ben Johnson said so.
Another coach who is staying with his team, Bobby Slowik in Houston. Which team do you think has the better outlook for 2024 between the Texans keeping Slowik and Detroit keeping Ben Johnson?
Well, it's interesting because one team, and Slowik's a perfect example of this. Slowik is getting a raise, okay, and I don't know why owners don't do this more. Back the Brinks truck up and pay a guy that might be the key to your biggest investment success in CJ Stroud. If it's working, like, let's kick the can down the road on you leaving. How much money does it take, right? And Gerard Johnson staying, right? Like, he was interviewing for some positions. He's saying he's staying. Like, these are positive indicators. These are like, hey, we've got something going here. I don't know why more coaches don't do this, right? I understand the risk of it all, not jumping when it's time to jump. But when you got CJ Stroud, I want to ride this train for a couple of years, right? I believe in the quarterback that much. I believe in D'Amico that much. Now, on the other side of things, you've got as many cold-blooded apex predators in the AFC as I can remember at any time, right? With the emergence of CJ Stroud, maybe Justin Herbert with Harbaugh is a lot better. You've obviously got Mahomes, Burrow, the whole gang, Josh Allen, the list goes on. If you're in the NFC and you're the Detroit Lions, one of the positives you have is that you are in the NFC and there are no Patrick Mahomeses. There are no Joe Burrows. There's one guy, in my opinion, that's in that elite category, and that's Matt Stafford. So we were talking about this today. When it comes to the NFC and the AFC, and you look at that Final Four, it's very telling. In the AFC, you need one of those guys, right? You need one of those guys. To beat Mahomes, you need a great team. You need one of those guys. You need a couple tries at it, right? If you're lucky. In the NFC, we just saw Brock Purdy and Jared Goff go toe-to-toe for the NFC Championship. Roster construction works in the NFC. Putting that first works in the NFC. So if you're a team evaluating free agency, possibly trading back in the draft, trading up in the draft, whatever it is, attacking that position. If I'm in the NFC, it's not to say if I see a special quarterback, I don't take a stab at it. But the reality is different. And so I think if you ask me that question, who's got a better shot? They have totally different challenges, right? One guy's got the next dude, Bobby Slowik in CJ Stroud, and one guy's got this tremendous culture and system that they built and evenly distributed playmakers. And yeah, you could use a big number one maybe in Detroit, but you have a lot of pieces there. And both those teams that played in the NFC Championship are roster constructed type teams where the strength of those teams, the quarterback, they're pluses, right? I'm not here to slander those guys, but it is about the roster construction. So I think another interesting element of this whole thing is you see Adam Schefter get on with the Ben Johnson news breaking and saying, like, you know, Ben's loyal. That's, you know, that's the spin that we're putting on it. And maybe that is true, but maybe he's just smart too, right? Because I think in this situation, he's being a good businessman. He may well be loyal, but sometimes the loyal decision is also the smart decision.
This whole thing with the coordinators makes me think about Luke Walton. Had the perfect scenario as assistant coach with Golden State, could have gone on and won like multiple titles, left, went to the Lakers, that failed. You know, now he's an assistant coach again.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's timing. It's like, do I get on the bus or do I stay? And hopefully it works out for both these guys because I like them both, Ben and Bobby Slowik. And they've got stuff they can learn from. Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowik just completed their first professional playoff runs, right, as coordinators. And, you know, like that for players that play in the dance for the first time and for coordinators, I would say even more so for coordinators because, I talk about this all the time. Players in the playoffs, you think they got loads of experience. They make boneheaded plays. Guys who never played in the playoffs make the biggest plays of the game. You know, like it happens all the time. Coordinators, though, game planning in the playoffs is different. Preparing for that game is different. The intensity is different. The things you're going to see are different. And so I think these guys will be even better for their experiences.
Rounds of interviews as well.
And rounds of interviews.